Hey, welcome to Audio Listeners. We're all about breaking down the best ideas from great books.
Want to learn from all those amazing books out there, but you just can't find the time?
That's exactly what we do. We pull the key ideas from the best books on growth and motivation.
So you can boost your personal growth, gain powerful knowledge, and find that daily motivation for free.
Here's the cool part. Every book is a complete playlist, so you can learn from start to finish.
So go check out the playlist section. You're going to find something that helps for sure.
And hey, if you like what we're doing, do us a favor and hit that like button.
You're not going to want to miss what's next, so make sure you subscribe for the latest books.
And one last thing, what book should we cover next? Let us know right down in the comments.
You know, it's a classic problem, right? How do you really know if someone's feelings for you are genuine? It's so easy to say all the right things, but actions, well, actions are a whole different ballgame. We're going to dive deep into Sacrifices of Sincerity, a text that makes a powerful case that true feelings aren't just talked about, they're proven, and often in some pretty dramatic ways. This quote, man, it just cuts right to the chase. That space between what a person says and what they actually do, that's the breeding ground for doubt. And doubt is pretty much the biggest killer when it comes to winning someone's heart. All right, so let's break it down. The fundamental problem is this: words are not enough. I mean, we're swimming in a sea of promises and compliments every single day, but deep down, we all know talk is cheap. So, according to the source, when you're facing resistance from someone, it's not always a hard no. A lot of the time, it's just a sign of their uncertainty. They're basically asking, are you for real, or are you just telling me what I want to hear? And let me tell you, no fancy speech is going to answer that question for them. And that, of course, brings us to the solution: the power of proof. But we're not just talking about any nice little gesture here. We're talking about creating what the text calls seductive evidence. Okay, so what is this seductive evidence? Well, think of it as a very specific, very strategic move. The key phrases here are well-timed and self-sacrificing. This is an action so powerful, it just bypasses all the logical doubts and hits you right in the emotions. And this kind of proof, it's like a 1-2 punch. First, on a logical level, it just erases any doubts. You've literally put your actions where your mouth is. But second, the deed itself, the bravery, the selflessness, that creates its own powerful wave of emotion. It's impressive. It's captivating. I love this quote from Natalie Barney because it's so provocative. What she's getting at is that what we often see as virtue or loyalty isn't some unbreakable fortress. It's actually a challenge, a test, just waiting for a deed that is powerful enough and seductive enough to overcome it. Okay, so how do you actually do this? Well, the text lays out 2 main paths you can take. One is all about spontaneity, and the other is about careful planning. So on one side, you've got the spontaneous action. This is about being ready to jump in when some unexpected crisis hits and impressing someone by going way above and beyond what's necessary. On the other side, you have the planned deed. This is way more calculated, maybe even creating a little problem just so you can swoop in and be the hero. One needs you to be ready, the other needs you to be strategic. Now, that's the theory. But the best part is seeing how this stuff plays out in real life. And trust me, history is just packed with these incredible stories that bring it all to life. Let's look at a couple. So, let's start with Napoleon's sister, Pauline Bonaparte. Now, she was famous for being, well, pretty fickle. She'd go from one lover to the next without a second thought. But one day, she has this terrible, agonizing toothache, and she is just petrified of the dentist and his, primitive tools. So her lover at the time, Major Canouville, sees how terrified she is. And what does he do? Something absolutely insane. He goes right up to the dentist, points to a perfectly healthy tooth in his own mouth, and tells him to pull it out, right there on the spot. And the story goes, he barely even flinched. Talk about a spontaneous, self-sacrificing deed. And the effect? It was immediate and just profound. In that one single moment, he proved his devotion in a way that 1,000 poems never could. It totally broke through her cynical exterior. And you know what? He became the only lover she ever stayed loyal to, the only one she ever truly mourned when he was gone. All right, for our next story, we've got something a bit more clever. This one's about a planned deed. So Count Gramont finally gets a date with a super famous courtesan, Marianne Delorme, but last minute, she cancels. The excuse? A headache. Yeah, right. He knows exactly what's up. She's seeing a rival. Now, a normal guy might get mad, right? Not Grandmont, he gets creative. He tracks down his rival, this duke, and cleverly tricks him into holding his horse for him right under Marion's window. He basically makes this high and mighty duke look like a common stable boy for all to see. And when Marion saw it, oh, her resistance just crumbled. She burst out laughing. His bold, playful, and totally eccentric action was undeniable proof of how much he wanted her, and it was way more charming than just complaining. He won her over not with sacrifice, but with pure, audacious wit, and it totally worked. But what if we flip the whole script? I mean, this is a really fascinating twist in the text. What if, instead of you being the one who has to prove yourself, you make everyone else prove themselves to you? Yeah, the whole idea is to make yourself the prize to be won. You cultivate this aura of being just out of reach, of being unattainable, and you force other people to be the ones performing the grand gestures to win your affection. And the master of this was a Renaissance courtesan named Tullia d'Aragona. See, the thing about Tullia is that she wasn't just relying on conventional beauty. She built this whole persona as this brilliant, untouchable, intellectual muse. She'd hold back her favors, which forced men to compete like crazy for her attention, writing her poems, fighting for her honor, and the more they had to work for it, the more valuable she became in their eyes. It's brilliant, really. And the perfect symbol for this whole dynamic is the tournament, right? You can say you're a great knight, but in a real tournament, there's no faking it. The proof is right there. As the quote puts it so vividly, the knight she ultimately chooses won't be the one with the best words. He'll be the one with blood on his face and a few broken limbs. Now that's proof. So all of this kind of leaves us with one big question to think about. In our world today, with all the texting and social media and endless big talk, what does real proof of sincerity even look like? What's the modern version of getting a tooth pulled for someone? It's something to think about, isn't it?
Today, we're diving into a theory of seduction that is, well, it's pretty fascinating and maybe a little unsettling. It argues that the most powerful force in attraction has almost nothing to do with who we are now and everything to do with a deep, unconscious pull toward our past.
So let's start with a question for you. Why do we look back on childhood like it was some kind of golden age? Seriously, think about it. We just kind of airbrush out all the tough parts, the confusion, the powerlessness, the actual pain, and we remember this glossy, sentimental version. Why do we do that?
Well, the theory we're exploring today has a pretty compelling answer. It says that the pressures of being an adult, they're so crushing that a part of us secretly just wants to go back. Back to being dependent, back to when someone else took care of things. And here's the wild part. This theory says that yearning has a massive, often hidden, erotic charge to it.
All right, so here's our game plan. First, we're going to see how this whole idea jumped from the therapist's couch into the world of seduction. Then, we'll break down 4 different ways this works: playing the parent, tapping into those teenage ideals, and even flipping the whole script. And finally, we'll grapple with what this childhood spell really means.
You know, this whole idea actually started with a really strange problem that one of the most famous minds of the 20th century, Sigmund Freud, kept running into. Early in his career, he noticed this bizarre and incredibly powerful thing happening over and over again with his patients.
He called it transference. See, as his patients would lie there, talking about their earliest memories of love, of being cared for, of being neglected, they would start to regress. They'd unconsciously stop seeing Freud as their doctor and start seeing him as a father. And all those tangled, buried feelings from childhood would come flooding out, aimed directly at him. You know what happened? A lot of them fell desperately in love with him.
So the wild thing is, you can actually take this dynamic out of the clinic. The secret is creating a similar kind of space. You get someone talking about their childhood, you listen really closely for what's not being said, but you do it with this therapist pose. You're caring, you're attentive, but you're also a little bit distant, a little bit of a blank screen, and that space invites them to project all their own stuff onto you.
Okay, so let's get into the first 2 big strategies. And these are all about putting yourself in the role of a parent figure. I mean, we're tapping into the most fundamental relationships we've ever had here.
So you've got 2 very different flavors of this. On one side, there's infantile regression. This is about recreating that ultimate fantasy of unconditional motherly love. You know, no judgment, total comfort, total security. Then you've got Oedipal regression, which is way more complex. This brings in that fatherly energy, love, yeah, but also rules, discipline, even a little bit of denial. It recreates that classic, complicated family dynamic. For a perfect example of infantile regression, just look at the writer Victor Hugo. He had a really rough childhood, always felt like he never got enough love from his mother, and his lover, Juliette Drouet, gave him exactly that. He had all these affairs, but she never judged him. She was just this constant source of comfort and motherly devotion. And you know what? In the end, that unconditional love gave her complete and total power over him. When she finally had enough and threatened to leave, this great literary genius was reduced to a sobbing child begging her to stay.
Now for the eatable side, think about the story of Professor Moot from The Blue Angel. He's the super stern, authoritative schoolmaster who falls for a cabaret singer named Rosa. But here's the twist. She doesn't cower before him. No, she treats him like a naughty little boy. She scolds him, she teases him, but she also gives him moments of tenderness, and he absolutely loves it. This powerful grown man is completely undone because she puts him back in the role of a child who's desperate for both discipline and affection from a powerful parent.
Okay, let's shift gears to the next couple of strategies. These are a little different. It's not about you becoming the parent. It's about tapping into the ideals of their youth, or, and this is a really clever twist, it's about you becoming the child.
So here's how these two break down. With ego-ideal regression, your goal is to make the other person feel like they're finally living out some romantic, adventurous dream they had as a teenager. You become their ideal. But with reverse parental regression, you do a complete 180. You take on this vulnerable, almost childish role, and you let them feel the power and the pleasure of being the strong, protective parent.
This quote from psychoanalyst Theodore Rake just nails the whole idea behind ego-ideal regression. It suggests we don't just fall in love with a person. We fall in love with the ideal version of ourselves that we see in them. It's like finding that better self we always dreamed we could be, but in the form of another person.
And I've got the perfect case study for this. The French writer Chateaubriand. When he was a young man, he spent 2 years basically in a passionate, all-consuming relationship with a woman he made up in his head. Her name was Sylphide. She was this perfect fantasy, and of course, no real woman could ever live up to her.
But then, decades pass. He's old, he's jaded, and he meets Madame Recamier. And somehow, she was different. She was ethereal. She just got him. She mirrored his spirit. And he suddenly realized she was Sylphide. She was his fantasy made real, and by becoming that youthful ideal, she let him regress back to the pure feeling of his very first love, and he was completely hers.
Okay, now for that role reversal. Let's talk about King James I of England. This guy had a horribly traumatic childhood. We're talking murder, betrayal, the whole 9 yards. So as an adult, he was carrying these deep wounds, and when his own son died, he was left totally vulnerable, with this aching need to give the kind of fatherly protection he himself never got.
And right into that emotional vacuum steps this handsome young man, George Villiers. And he plays the part of the innocent, adorable child to perfection. He was charming, he never asked for anything, which just made the king want to spoil him. He seemed to crave exactly the kind of tender attention the king was desperate to give. By letting the king play the doting, protective father, Villiers gained unbelievable influence. Because in the end, it was the child who was really pulling all the strings.
And you know this dynamic isn't just some weird historical thing? It's so universal, it's literally baked into other cultures. In Japan, there's a specific word for it, amaeru. It means to play the baby in order to receive love and affection. And some experts think this single concept is the key to understanding everything from Japanese family life to workplace dynamics. It seems to be a fundamental part of the human playbook.
So after going through all these incredibly powerful dynamics, we're left with a really fundamental question about what attraction even is. I mean, if this kind of deep regression is so central to seduction, what does that say about our relationships? Well, this leads to a pretty bold claim, that for real seduction to even happen, one person has to regress. The logic goes like this. Being a responsible adult isn't a fantasy, right? It's work. It's a duty. Seduction is an escape from that duty. And this theory argues that the most potent fantasies we have are all rooted in childhood.
But there's a catch. There's always a catch, isn't there? There is one major danger in all of this. Eventually, the person playing the child might get sick of being dependent. They might start to push back, to rebel against the parent figure to get their independence back. And, according to this theory, that rebellion is almost guaranteed to happen.
And that leaves us with our final, pretty provocative thought. If this theory is true, if powerful attraction really depends on creating this parent-child imbalance, this regression into a state of dependency, then can love ever actually be a relationship between two mature, independent equals? It's a challenging question for sure, and definitely one worth thinking about.
Okay, so let's talk about something fascinating, that pull towards the forbidden. Ever wondered why that is? Well, we're going to dive right into that, because it turns out it's one of the most powerful tools of attraction out there. I mean, you've seen this a million times, right? In movies, in books, maybe even in your own life. That magnetic pull towards the bad boy or the femme fatale, the person with that little edge of danger. But what is really going on there? What's the psychology behind it? You know, this isn't a new idea. This quote right here, mad, bad, and dangerous to know, it was written about the poet Lord Byron over 2 centuries ago. And it's not just a catchy phrase, it's like the perfect tagline for this whole idea. It totally nails the thrill of crossing a line. A thrill that Byron, well, he basically perfected. So, to really get this, we've got to look at the guy who basically wrote the book on it, Lord Byron. This dude wasn't just some famous poet, he was a full-blown phenomenon, and his entire celebrity was built on scandal. Okay, so picture this. 1812. Byron drops this poem, Childe Harold, and boom, he's an instant celebrity. Why? Because everyone was whispering that the dark, debauched hero of the poem was actually him. He blurred that line between art and reality, and London society just ate it up. They were obsessed. And he absolutely used this new persona. He started systematically going after these high society women, leading them past society's limits one by one. You had Lady Caroline Lamb, an unhappy wife who called him her fate and kicked off this huge public scandal. Then there's Lady Frances Webster, all prim and proper, who he supposedly seduced after having her drink wine from a human skull. And then he went for the ultimate taboo, an affair with his own half-sister Augusta. Even his future wife, Annabella Milbank, was obsessed with the idea of reforming this fallen angel. And look at the timeline. This all happened so fast. In just 4 years, he built this legendary reputation for breaking every rule. It's wild, right? It got him kicked out of England, but here's the crazy part. It only made him more desirable. Women were literally chasing him across Europe, practically lining up to be part of the scandal. So this begs the question, right? What was going on psychologically? Why were people so drawn to a guy who was so clearly a walking disaster? Well, the answer, it's not really about him. It's about us. It comes down to this idea of the lost self. Think about it. We all have this adventurous, rebellious, maybe even a little bit of a darker side, the part of us that gets squashed down as we grow up. Society tells us to be polite, to be civilized, to color inside the lines, and that lost self gets buried. So we've got these two sides, right? The civilized self, which is all polite and follows the rules, and the lost self, which is rebellious and just wants an adventure. And here's the key. This kind of seduction, the dangerous kind, it bypasses our civilized side completely. It speaks directly to that hidden, repressed part of us that's dying to explore the forbidden. And that was Byron's superpower. He wasn't just some guy. He was a symbol, a lightning rod. For all the women in that super restrictive 19th century society, he represented a thrilling escape, a chance to tap into their own lost self and experience something forbidden, even for a short time. And this isn't just some artsy, poetic concept. Even Sigmund Freud was all over this. He basically said that desire needs something to push against. It needs an obstacle. The barrier, the you can't have this part, that's what turns the heat way, way up. Okay, so if that's the psychology, how do you turn it into a strategy? Let's break down the actual playbook here. It really comes down to 4 steps. First, you hint at a dark side, creating this aura of danger. Second, you build a bond with shared secrets, making it feel like it's the two of you against the world. Third, you mix things up, a little cruelty with tenderness, hinting that love isn't always nice and easy. And finally, the big one. You push your target past their own limits, into territory they never would have explored on their own. And this is so important. The goal isn't just to be bad all by yourself. No, the real magic happens when you make the other person your partner in crime. That's what all the secret glances and hidden messages are about. They create this incredible feeling of collusion, of guilt, of being in it together. It's us versus them, and that's an incredibly powerful bond. And like I said, this idea is ancient. Seriously, 2,000 years ago, the Roman poet Ovid was writing about this. He said, "A girl locked up by her husband's not chased, but pursued." He knew that the moment you forbid something, the moment you put up a wall, you're not stopping desire, you're actually creating it. So why does any of this matter now? what's the big takeaway from all this? Why is this idea so timeless? Well, it's because it taps into something really fundamental about us. Look, society needs limits to work. We need rules. But the second a limit is created, a part of us becomes obsessed with what's on the other side. It's a weird paradox, right? We're a species that needs rules, but is also dying to break them. A great way to think about it is the forbidden forest. You know, from all the old stories. Kids are told, don't go in there. It's dangerous. And what's the first thing that does? It makes the forest the only place they want to go. The warning doesn't prevent exploration, it practically invites it. And that leaves us with a really interesting final thought. If desire gets its fuel from boundaries, from things being forbidden, what happens when there are no boundaries left to cross? In a world where it feels like fewer and fewer things are off limits, what does that mean for the future of desire itself? All right, so today we're diving into a really fascinating strategy from the Art of Seduction, and it's one that seems kind of backward at first glance. It's all about using the spiritual to unlock the physical, a technique that's designed to slip right past our deepest, most guarded insecurities. So here's our game plan. First, we're going to tackle the core problem, our own insecurities. Then we'll see this strategy play out with an incredible case study from history. After that, we'll break down the actual playbook, get into the psychology of why it works so well, see how it applies today, and then wrap things up with a really important warning you're not going to want to miss. Okay, so let's start with something that's just fundamental to being human. It's the reason why just going straight for a physical connection can so often just fizzle out. Well, the core idea here is that pretty much everyone, and I mean everyone, no matter how good-looking or confident they seem on the outside, is carrying around some level of self-consciousness. We all have those nagging doubts about our bodies, about whether we're actually desirable. It's just part of the human condition. And this is where the strategy comes in. See, a direct, purely physical approach can accidentally poke at those very insecurities, right? It makes people get in their own heads and pull back. But a spiritual lure? It does the exact opposite. It pulls them out of themselves by getting them to focus on something bigger, something, well, sublime. And to see how this works in the real world, let's look at someone who is an absolute master of this. So for our case study, picture this. We're in Paris in the 1890s. It's glamorous, it's decadent. And our main character is Natalie Barney, an American heiress. Her target was Leanne de Pougy, who was one of the most famous, most desired courtesans of the entire era. What Barney did was basically a masterclass in this kind of spiritual seduction. You have to understand, Leanne had everything people thought you could want. Money, fame, endless attention from men. But inside, she was just bored out of her mind. She felt this deep heaviness from being wanted only for her body. Her whole life was physical, and it left her feeling completely empty. Now, look at Barney's approach here. This was not a rush job. It was a slow, deliberate performance, staged over time. And you can see the progression, right? It starts with this distant, almost religious-like admiration. Then she slowly builds this shared world around them, filled with art and poetry. The physical part only enters the picture way later, after the entire atmosphere is just soaked in this sublime spiritual energy. And that's the magic trick, right there. By changing the entire frame of the interaction, the physical part at the end didn't feel like a conquest at all. It was transformed into something else. A kind of pure, almost innocent meeting of two souls who had already connected on a much, much higher plane. Okay, so we've seen it in real life. Now let's jump over to classic literature, because Flaubert's novel Madame Bovary gives us this perfect, almost formulaic example of how you can apply these exact same principles in a much more calculated way. The character, Rodolphe, has this down to a science. It's a clear 3-step formula, and it's all designed to distract Emma from the raw physical reality of what he's actually doing. Step 1, he pretends to be sad and bored with the ordinary world. Step 2, he hints that their meeting isn't just random chance, but destiny. And step 3, he elevates her, calls her an angel, putting the whole thing on this high spiritual plane. It's a psychological shortcut, really, and it lets him condense what could take months into just a handful of conversations. So why on earth is this so powerful? I mean, what is actually going on inside our brains when somebody uses these kinds of spiritual lures on us? The psychology behind it is actually pretty deep and honestly fascinating. The book makes this really powerful point. Just think about religion for a second. It might be the single most seductive system ever invented. Why? Because it speaks directly to our biggest, deepest fears, death, meaninglessness, and it offers us this incredible cure, a connection to something huge, something eternal, something that makes us feel important. And this quote just nails the core mechanic. The language we used for spiritual ecstasy, being transported, rapture, bliss, is incredibly similar to the language of physical passion. That feeling of being lifted out of your day-to-day self, well, it primes your mind for a totally different kind of release. It's a very short leap from one to the other. Okay, but let's be real. In our much more secular world, just dropping religious language might not land the way it used to. But the underlying strategy, it doesn't go away. It just puts on a different outfit. Today, the modern versions of that spiritual ecstasy are often found in art and culture. So you've basically got two main ways to do this. On one hand, you can actually create art for the person. Write a poem, a song. This has this incredibly powerful effect of making them feel like they've been immortalized. Or you can use art that already exists as a kind of shared holy space. A powerful play, a beautiful museum. These places lift your time together out of the ordinary and make it feel truly profound.
And what this all taps into is a very simple, very deep human desire. By connecting a fleeting, temporary human affair to a timeless piece of art, you give it this seductive weight and meaning. You create the illusion that it's something eternal, something deeply significant. But, and this is a huge but, like any really powerful tool, this one comes with a serious warning label. If you get it wrong, it can backfire in a pretty spectacular way and create the exact opposite effect you were hoping for.
Here's the line you have to walk. This whole strategy is about creating an intense feeling of depth in the present moment. It is not about promising some long-term, forever future. All that talk about soulmates and destiny can very quickly trigger a fear of commitment, and that is a total buzzkill for seduction. The goal here is the intensity of that spiritual high, not how long it's going to last. And that leaves us with this final, pretty provocative question to think about in our own lives. If this human need for the sublime, for transcendence, is so powerful, what are the ultimate spiritual lures in our modern secular world? Where do we, both as a culture and just as individuals, look for that feeling today? All right, welcome. Today, we're diving into a really fascinating and honestly pretty controversial theory of influence. The whole idea is that to truly connect with someone, we're talking romance, negotiation, you name it, you actually need to create an emotional roller coaster. A mix of pleasure with these, calculated moments of pain. So let's get right into it. So the entire premise of our source material really boils down to this single provocative idea. I mean, it completely flips conventional wisdom on its head, right? It suggests that the path to a profound connection isn't paved with constant sweetness. No, it's something way more volatile. So what is the big problem with being nice? I mean, isn't that what we're all taught to do? Well, according to our source, constant, predictable kindness has one major flaw. It's just boring. Okay, this slide really gets to the core of the argument. Look at the two columns. On one side, you've got constant niceness. Yeah, it's predictable, it's soothing, but ultimately it's monotonous. Then you look at the other side, a mix of pleasure and pain. That creates tension, unpredictability, and according to the source, this combination isn't just more exciting, it's straight up addictive. It adds this element of suspense that can take a pleasant, forgettable interaction and turn it into something deeply compelling. The writer Stendhal, who's quoted in our source, just nailed it. The more one pleases generally, the less one pleases profoundly. Think about it. By trying to be agreeable all the time, you might avoid a fight, sure, but you also completely miss the chance to create those deep, powerful emotional connections. You're keeping things smooth on the surface, but also incredibly shallow. So, what does this actually look like in practice? Well, the source gives us this powerful case study of an emotional roller coaster that is both totally captivating and, let's be honest, a little bit terrifying. Okay, so meet our two main characters. We have Don Mateo, a rich, powerful guy who thinks he can buy just about anything. And then we have Conchita Perez, a young factory worker he decides will be his next conquest. He sees himself as this experienced predator, but as you're about to see, he has absolutely no idea who he's really messing with. So just look at this timeline. The relationship is just a masterclass in emotional whiplash. First, Conchita pulls him in with a kiss. only to immediately push him away with accusations. He's left completely confused and feeling guilty. Then he offers her this life of luxury, and what does she do? She vanishes, making him feel cheap and totally foolish. And just when he's at his absolute lowest, she pops back up, full of love and promises. This cycle of hope and despair just keeps escalating until you get to the ultimate public humiliation, followed by her total, shocking surrender. It's wild. And here's the thing. According to the source, this wasn't random at all. It was a deliberate strategy. As you can see here, each low she created, the guilt, the jealousy, the anguish, it was all designed to carve out this kind of emotional vacuum. And what that did was make the subsequent highs, her joyful returns, her declarations of love, feel exponentially more intense. He became completely, utterly addicted to this emotional roller coaster she had him on. Now, this whole push and pull thing isn't just about romance. The source argues it can be an incredibly powerful tool for breaking down anyone's defenses in any high-stakes situation, really, from tense negotiations to journalism. Let's talk about the legendary journalist Oriana Fallaci. Her whole job was to interview some of the most powerful, most guarded people on the planet. We're talking people trained to reveal absolutely nothing. She knew that just flattering them wasn't going to work, so she developed a technique based on these exact same principles of pleasure and pain. So here's how her method worked. She'd start off soft, building rapport with personal, philosophical questions. Then, once they were relaxed, bam, she'd strike with a sharp, painful question that was aimed right at a deep insecurity. And just as they were reeling from that, she'd pivot, offering a moment of kindness or praise. This constant cycle of harshness and then relief kept them completely off balance, emotionally, and it just slowly dismantled their public facade. And wow, the results were explosive. After she praised him for his diplomatic work, Henry Kissinger was goaded into revealing this really embarrassing self-image he had of himself as a lonesome cowboy. The Shah of Iran, after a similar emotional ride, let slip his plan to raise oil prices, which was a massive geopolitical secret. Both of these powerful men revealed things they later deeply, deeply regretted, all because they were caught in Fallaci's web. Okay, so what is the psychology behind all of this? Why is this mix of pleasure and pain so incredibly potent? Well, the source argues that it all comes down to a concept it calls erotic tension. Now, the term erotic tension might sound purely physical, right? But the source actually defines it as a totally emotional state. Just think about a great thriller movie. The suspense and the anxiety are what make that final resolution so incredibly satisfying. The source argues the exact same principle applies to human connection. Without that buildup of tension, the final release of pleasure just feels, weak and totally forgettable. The philosopher Soren Kierkegaard captured this idea so perfectly when he wrote about our fascination with nature. He argued that it's not just the beauty that captivates us, but the secretive anxiety and horror that lies just beneath the surface. It's that wild, unpredictable element that really draws us in. In other words, a little bit of fear makes things a whole lot more interesting. To describe this feeling, the source uses this really powerful metaphor of a precipice. Imagine you're standing at the edge of a cliff. You feel this dizzying mix of fear and temptation. You're terrified of falling, of course, but there's a small part of you that's thrilled by the possibility. That feeling of being right on the knife's edge between safety and danger, that's exactly what this technique is trying to create. This chart really shows just how powerful this combination can be. According to the source, kindness alone has, some effect. Pain alone has very little. But when you combine them, the effect isn't just added together, it's multiplied. The constant back and forth between the two creates this potent, really addictive emotional cocktail. So how do you actually apply this? Well, the source distills all these ideas into a clear step-by-step formula, like a recipe for creating this emotional roller coaster. But, and this is important, it also comes with a crucial warning. So here's the formula in a nutshell. First, you shatter their expectations by never being too nice. You create tension through strategic absence, emotional distance. Then, you stir up negative emotions, things like guilt or jealousy. After that, you inflict a sharp moment of pain, a fight, a breakup, to create that emotional vacuum we talked about. And then finally, you offer the release by returning to kindness, which makes that reconciliation feel unbelievably powerful and, yes, addictive. But, and I can't stress this enough, this is probably the most important part. The source is crystal clear that this is a high-risk strategy. It is not a one-size-fits-all approach, and using it on the wrong person or at the wrong time, it can backfire spectacularly.
So this table here lays out the rules of engagement. The source warns you, do not use this on people who are already in pain. They'll just see you as another source of suffering and they will run. This tactic is really meant for those who have it easy, people in positions of power who might be unconsciously bored and are actually craving a challenge. And timing. Timing is everything. You can't lead with pain. You have to bait the hook with sweetness and affection first. The pain only works its magic after an emotional connection has already been established. And all of this brings us to the ultimate question, doesn't it? Our source provides a pretty powerful framework for understanding emotional influence. But where do we draw the line? Where does creating a captivating emotional experience end and engaging in toxic manipulation begin? Is it about intent, or is any deliberate creation of pain in a relationship just inherently manipulative? That's the question I'm going to leave you with. Thanks for watching.